Good morning. Thank you all for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Easter Calvet. I'm the Director of Family and Community Services at Wu Yi Children's Services in San Francisco. And I'm here along with my colleague Cheryl Hornay, who's Director of Early Learning Services at Wu Yi. And we are co-facilitators for the Apprenticeship Circle. So thank you for attending this morning. This morning, we will have a webinar around connecting to workforce development boards and the public workforce system. This is our second webinar for the year, and this was a topic that was requested by the group some time ago. It was originally scheduled for last month, but unfortunately, we could not do it last month. So we will be presenting this month. So today we have with us Tracy Carey, who's going to be our presenter. And just a little information around Tracy. She leads Midwest Urban Strategies, a consortium of urban workforce boards with more than 30 million in federal and philanthropy investments and a growing portfolio of business and service partners. Midwest Urban Strategies delivers high-value resources to its members. The consortium is to grow business investment and expand and diversify talent in the Midwest. Tracy is also a subject matter expert for the Early Childhood Workforce Connector and services on the ECWC leadership team. Prior to her tenure with MUS, Tracy enjoyed nearly 2 decades of service development and supporting workforce development programs and strategies. As the Director of Strategic Initiative for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Milwaukee, Tracy facilitated the Summer Youth Employment Program that provided first jobs for more than 500 young people annually. She also developed and facilitated training programs for opportunity youth that re-engaged them in school and our work. In 2014, she joined Employ Milwaukee, the Workforce Development Board for Milwaukee County, as the Director of Fund Development and Strategic Initiatives. While serving in that capacity, she raised an additional $13 million and supported the startup of MUS. Then in 2018, she left Milwaukee and joined the staff at Partner for Work, the Workforce Development Board for the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County in Pennsylvania as the Chief Strategy Officer. At P4W, Tracy led an innovative team to improve workforce development practice, including the restart of the area's workforce funding collaborative. She holds a BA in English from the University of Wisconsin, a certificate in women's studies from the University of Wisconsin. She also has a certificate in nonprofit management from the Center for Nonprofit Management and Business and Economic and Financial Professional certification from the National Development Council. So this morning, please join me in welcoming Tracy Carey. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Easter. It's always humbling to hear somebody read your set of experiences. So I do appreciate that introduction and the opportunity to join you today in this conversation. I do have a slide deck that I've prepared to walk us through this conversation. And I'm excited to really talk about connecting the dots between early childhood education practitioners and the public workforce system, and to begin to think about what that can look like and how that can really build the bridges necessary to make registered apprenticeship and talent development overall as effective as it can be to grow and advance the early childhood education industry. So, as Easter said, my name is Tracy Carey. I am the Executive Director of Midwest Urban Strategies. And today, as I understand it, the group was very interested in thinking through and learning a bit more about the public workforce system, the resources that that system has that might be brought to bear to support the early childhood education industry writ large, and more specifically, registered apprenticeship in early childhood education. And so to that end, I've planned a conversation, and we'll have some Q&A at the end. But if you think of something in the meantime, feel free to throw it in the chat, and we're happy to entertain things, burning questions or thoughts as we move along. I will start today by just doing sort of a registered apprenticeship refresh or level set, just so that I have an understanding about who's in the room and what their level of experience and knowledge is around registered apprenticeship in early childhood education. And then I'll take us through an introduction to the public workforce system to help us understand how that system is positioned, what the points of connectivity are, and what the resources and opportunities are that the early childhood education industry can rely on to connect to. And then from there, we'll speak a bit about the funding sources and strategies to utilize those sources, and sort of what those next steps might look like for folks who are interested in moving forward with better connecting to those systems. So briefly, Midwest Urban Strategies is a consortium of workforce development boards. So those are the entities that are the drivers of the public workforce system. And we organized back in 2014. I'll talk a bit more about the law that governs our system and how that influenced the way that we organized. But when we organized, we did it to advance innovation and best practices in the public workforce system through intentional collaboration. And one of the areas that we have gone deep in is early childhood education. And we've done that because we believe that early childhood educators are the workforce behind the workforce. And if we don't have a sufficient supply of early childhood educators that are well positioned and well prepared, then the rest of the folks who need to go to work won't be able to. So together we work to design, test, and implement strategies and practices that help to drive innovation and quality programming across the Midwest region. And we are now moving into a broader network with representation in states outside of the Midwest region as well. So we are a partner, and that is one of the things that I hope you walk away from this really understanding is the power that we believe exists in partnership. We are a partner in this intermediary that was funded by the Department of Labor. Our lead in that partnership is WRMA. They hold the contract with the Department of Labor, and they organized us, Midwest Urban Strategies, as well as LPE, as the formal deliverers of this initiative that we're in the midst of. And we have a couple of other collaborative partners that were part of the grant writing process. And that includes the Council for Professional Recognition, and then the Kentucky Governor's Office of Early Childhood. And it's important to understand sort of how we're situated and organized, because the Early Childhood Workforce Connector is the product of all of those organizations. It is not an organization in and of itself. It is a strategy that works to promote and develop registered apprenticeship programs that result in a sustainable, diverse, inclusive, well-qualified, and well-compensated early childhood education workforce. So first off, I just want to get a sense from the room how familiar you are with early childhood education registered apprenticeship programs. And so we've launched the poll. Let me know if you're involved in one right now, aware, but don't have a direct experience, or not much and really want to know more. Wow, this is a nice mix. All right, well, it looks like we are kind of right in that middle space of not having any experience, any direct experience, and really not having any experience at all. So those are the two largest categories. And so I'm glad that I've developed this the way that um, I don't know if we can pull down the poll. Just working through the technical components here. Oh, maybe that was me. All right. So I'm glad that I structured this the way that I did, because I wasn't exactly sure who I would meet in this room. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about registered apprenticeship from a 10,000 foot look. So registered apprenticeship is an industry-driven strategy that we use to advance high-quality career pathways that really build a talented workforce using paid work experience, classroom instruction, and a portable, nationally recognized credential. We hear a lot about work-based learning, and oftentimes use terms interchangeably. So, we might talk about internships or apprenticeship with a lowercase a. Those are all fine tools to use in your toolkit. But when we talk about registered apprenticeship, we're talking about the gold standard. And it's a system that is formally structured and reviewed with industry professionals like yourselves driving the process for what that program should look like. And for us here at the Early Childhood Workforce Connector, we believe that those registered apprenticeship programs should reflect that local community. They should respond to those local needs, and they should look like what that local community um, needs them to look like. But there are some basic things that are included in every registered apprenticeship program. That's what makes it a registered apprenticeship program. And that includes the on-the-job training component. It is earn while you learn. So you are employed and learning and earning credentials. That related technical instruction coursework. There's a mentorship component, which is a really important part of the work of registered apprenticeship, especially in early childhood education. It brings with it access to state and federal funding because of its formal structure, as well as support from national networks of experts like the Early Childhood Workforce Connector. And then lastly, that nationally recognized credential. Again, that registered apprenticeship approach is the gold standard. And you might hear people talk about apprenticeship programs, lowercase a. That is not the same. Important, plays a role. Sometimes it's called pre-apprenticeship, or you might hear it called other things. But if a program is registered, we know that it has quality and we can measure that. So I want to talk a little bit about early childhood education registered apprenticeships. And I won't spend a lot of time, but what we understand about early childhood education registered apprenticeships is that they are important tools to help us really grow this early childhood education workforce. We know that there are challenges in this industry to developing the talent pool that we need, and having that talent pool prepared to go into our classrooms and provide the care and love and oversight and guidance to our little list of people. And we believe that registered apprenticeship is a tool that can help us to move that forward. The career opportunities that are included in this process of registered apprenticeship are many and diverse. And so it's important to note that the registered apprenticeship programs that can be built are stackable. And so you might begin with that child development associate credential and build from there using an apprenticeship model towards an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree from there. We've got programs that are doing that, stacking those programs together to build out the credentialing so that individuals who are working in the industry and want to advance in their occupations and roles within the centers that they're working in have the chance to do that using a model like registered apprenticeship. So the first question that I hear, and you probably are wondering about as I speak, is how do you pay for this? The childcare industry itself is, operating on such thin margins, and it has done everything that it can to make sure that it's investing in the places that matter the most, and that's in its people, and in the children that are served. So one of the things that we believe, and part of the benefit of having Midwest Urban Strategies as a partner in the Early Childhood Workforce Connector project, is that systems like the public workforce system can bring benefit. And when we align systems together, it makes the practice of building our talent much more robust. And so part of the answer to how we cover the cost of registered apprenticeship is through those partnerships. And I said at the beginning that of our conversation that you'll hear me talk a lot about partnership, because I believe, and we at ECWC believe, it's through connections, partnerships, and relationships that you're best able to achieve your end goals of building a talented and qualified workforce. So next poll, how familiar are you with the workforce system? So are you very familiar with it? Or you've heard of it, or not familiar really with it at all? All right. Looks like about half of you have heard of it before, and another big chunk are not familiar with it really at all. So this is a great opportunity for me to share uh, to share more about the system that I'm so familiar with, and that I think can bring real benefit to the work that you all are doing every day. So the public workforce system is much like the early childhood education system or the Head Start system, is a federally structured system that exists from policy, from law, that lays out what that system will look like. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what that includes. The current law that governs the public workforce system is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. Sometimes we call it WIOA. And WIOA is the predecessor to the Workforce Investment Act. I mentioned that my organization began its work together when the law was changing. That is specifically the Workforce Investment Act to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And that was an important transition because the structure and requirements for how to practice workforce development changed substantially in that transition from WIA to WIOA. One of the big changes was a more aggressive and engaging approach to registered apprenticeship. It was during this transition from WIA to WIOA that the Department of Labor really made a decision to dig into registered apprenticeship and to grow registered apprenticeship in what they termed non-traditional occupations. Non-traditional occupations are really anything other than construction and manufacturing. Anything else was non-traditional. And early childhood education sat in that space. Um, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act also um, really began to look at what innovation might look like in the public workforce system. And that caught my interest. And my work, the body of my work has always been around helping to drive and push systems and programs to think about what that next step is going to look like. So the idea of intentionally connecting innovation to a public system was interesting. And so I wanted to roll up my sleeves and dig into what that could look like. In terms of the tactical or meaty side of that, that included bringing services to employers in a much more robust way. One of the things that the public workforce system does is serves and engages the employer ecosystem in a very thoughtful way. In fact, 51% of the governing body of every workforce development board is made up of employers. Early childhood education providers are employers. So I would encourage you to start to think about just from that first positioning, how as an employer might you start thinking about connecting to your workforce board? Because that is where the strategy happens at that board level, and the ability to have your seat at the table and your voice in the game is what begins to help to start to change the strategy and infuse more innovation in that local system. The other side of the equation of the public workforce system is the workers themselves. So we talk about the public workforce system as having a dual customer approach. We serve both employers and job seekers. Sometimes those two can feel like they conflict with each other, because the needs of employers might be different than the needs of job seekers or workers. But we work to find that sweet spot that we can bring those two things together. Oftentimes that happens through training and education programs, credentialing services, um, building out broader sector partnerships to bring employers together to think about how they can solve problems like access to childcare for their workforce. Uh, these are all parts of the work that the public workforce system is empowered and required to do under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Structurally, the individuals served through these services include both adults and youth. Adults are divided up into, this is getting way in the weeds, but it's important probably to know, adults are broken up into two categories. The adult category is focused on individuals who have maybe a scanty work history, or they've had some really significant barriers to employment. Maybe they've had lots of jobs for very short periods of time, but they don't have a consistent connection to the workforce, and they need additional support, and maybe some training and credentialing, certainly some supportive services to help get them prepared to attach and sustain in the workforce. The other part of that adult side is dislocated workers. Those are individuals who have a solid work history, but have been disconnected from the workforce. Oftentimes that's in a formal way through a layoff. And those individuals are served same set of services. They might need to be reskilled. They might need some additional support services. Imagine somebody who's, maybe in their 40s or 50s who has worked at a job for 15 or 20 years and is let go from that job because of downsizing or other changes within that industry, their skills in the labor market are going to need a little bit of retooling to help reconnect them to the workforce. And so the public workforce system is there to help to support them to do that. That all happens through funding that the workforce development boards, which are the intermediaries, and we'll get into that here in a second, but that they facilitate in local communities. Um, the workforce development boards, oftentimes the majority of them exist in local communities and really do represent the the needs and interests of those local workforce areas. There are some states that operate one state systems, meaning that the Workforce Development Board is part of state government. They don't have local workforce development boards. Rather, they govern and administer resources from the state out to the entirety of that state in all of its communities. We believe that local systems are the best way to deliver services. They understand what that local ecosystem looks like. There is a huge difference. I don't know if anybody on the call is from Wisconsin, but there is a huge difference in the labor market from Milwaukee to Eau Claire. And those, although Eau Claire is, you know, a decently sized city, it's a college town, and um, its labor ecosystem is very different than the ecosystem that exists here in the Milwaukee area. And so we believe that workforce development systems need to respond to and reflect that those local priorities and needs. The local entity that coordinates those services in communities where there are local workforce areas is called the Workforce Development Board. That Workforce Development Board exists to facilitate those resources using um, a local planning process that happens most often every 2 years. And that local plan lays out what the priorities are for that local area using labor market information and community demographic information. This is another opportunity to think about how you might partner with your workforce development board in their planning process. So if you connect into your workforce development board during that planning process and help them to understand not just the importance, because I think workforce development boards understand that access to high quality childcare services is essential, but they don't necessarily understand how they can solve that problem, how they can be a partner in that problem, how they can collaborate in bringing solutions to that problem. So if you can engage with your workforce development board and help them to understand tactically how they could bring support and a broader lens or aperture to the issue, to begin to bring some solutions and some resources. Um, that's a great way to begin to build that connective tissue between two systems that I believe will then help us to get closer to the kind of investments we need to shore up the holes that exist in our talent pool currently. So those local workforce development boards um, exist to coordinate the system in that local area. They oftentimes procure providers to facilitate services for them. And many of them are hosting business service departments that may organize industry partnerships. This is another opportunity for the childcare industry to think about how to partner. Build a sector strategy using your local workforce development board as your anchor institution to help support those efforts. Um, and when we think about registered apprenticeship, those workforce development boards may serve as the sponsor for that registered apprenticeship program, or as an investor using some of their um, statutorily defined resources to support the the needs of that registered apprenticeship program. And those things may include the related technical instruction, the supportive services that apprentices need, as well as providing the opportunity for additional case management support to those apprentices to help to make sure that they are not just sustaining in their apprenticeship, but thriving and making it all the way through that apprenticeship program. So I mentioned a bit ago about the American Job Center and the procurement that happens by that Workforce Development Board. That's a part of the convening of that ecosystem that the Workforce Development Board is responsible for coordinating and facilitating. American Job Centers are the place where people who want to, job seekers or workers who want to benefit from the resources of the public workforce system, are able to go and get those services. As employers, you can connect and partner with the Workforce Development Board so that, especially through apprenticeship programs, you can eliminate the need for people to have to go to yet another place. And we have some thoughts and strategies that, at an individual level, if you're building a program, or perhaps in another conversation, we could talk about how to structure those relationships so that that workforce board and that American Job Center operator can create a system that makes it easier for people to use the resources without having to take time and the effort necessary to actually go to one of those locations. So certainly more to come on that, but that is an important part. That's the centerpiece of the ecosystem, that American Job Center. Out of the ecosystem, we have partners like community and technical colleges and training providers. They're often the ones who are providing the related technical instruction when we're thinking about a registered apprenticeship program. But even outside of registered apprenticeship, those workforce development boards facilitate funding to cover the costs of people engaged in credential-based training that is driven by labor market indicators that suggest the importance of that that industry and that credential for that region. Now, I said that in a very particular way on purpose. One of the things that we've experienced, and I've experienced for as long as I've been working on the ECE work and trying to connect it to the public workforce system, and that is that workforce development boards will say, we can't work with childcare. We can't work with the early childhood education workforce because the wages are too low and there isn't sufficient job quality. And our response to that is wrong. So while yes, wages are low, that does not mean that that is not an in-demand job. And we need them at our side to advocate and work with us to address that wage issue, to help us move people up that economic ladder using tools like registered apprenticeship to accomplish that. And so I think we've done a good job of helping boards get past that, understanding that their performance, and this is important for, I think, everyone to be aware of, the public workforce system has specific performance measures that they must meet annually, or they are at risk of losing their funding. And those performance measures are reported annually to the state and to the federal government. And those include retention and employment at the second quarter after exit from the program and the fourth quarter after exit from the program. So when somebody's using the public workforce system, they are actually supported for 1 year after they are exited from their programming to ensure that they are sustaining their connection to the workforce, and measured at second and fourth quarter. Another measure that they have to report on is wages. So, and there are targets that they are held to in terms of median wages. And so some of the pushback around wages is a concern that they're going to impact their median wage requirement in their performance measures. And our response to that, and what we'd like to encourage you to use as your response, is that the number of childcare workers that we would be supporting in this is so small, it gets completely wiped out when you do the pool of a median wage. So that's not a worry. We can move past that. We're going to help you get second and fourth quarter because it's registered apprenticeship. And moving on to the other two that are significant here, credential attainment. Everybody in a registered apprenticeship program is going to get a credential. And I know with Head Start, you guys are really focused on credentials and that more formal side of education. So no doubt that that credential attainment requirement would be met, as well as the measurable skills gains. Again, those are all performance measures that have specific benchmarks that are negotiated between that local workforce area and their state that they have to meet every year, and they're measured against how they do on that performance. And so it's important to go into those relationships, building those relationships with an understanding of what those pressure points are that that local workforce board has to accomplish so that you can best negotiate your relationship with them with a full understanding of what their pain points include. And then, so last but not least, I would say the support services that the workforce boards facilitate include things like, access to transportation. So that's a big barrier. Access to sometimes they actually even pay for childcare for people who are in the need for access to childcare for some short-term need, uniforms, tools, a variety of support services. In the childcare industry, there would be specific support services that may be necessary, and those would be eligible to be covered by the WIOA resources that would be made available to individuals. And then lastly, I talked a bit about those industry partnerships and sector strategies. Having a childcare sector strategy in partnership with your workforce development board, I think is a best practice and one that I would really advocate that you consider. And again, I'm happy to have a conversation about what that might look like and examples of what that looks like. And I will talk a bit about one example here in just a second. So we're going to go a little bit into funding sources and strategies that will help us to achieve success. And I want to start with an example of a registered apprenticeship sponsor. And I don't know if Stacy's on this call or not. I know she's part of this group, but Stacy Johnson is at the YWCA in St. Louis, and she is a part of this Missouri example. The Kansas City Workforce Development Board Full Employment Council was approached by the state of Missouri and asked if they would stand as a group sponsor for the state to facilitate a registered apprenticeship program for early childhood education. They were asked to partner with the YWCA and Urban League in St. Louis to build out this model for registered apprenticeship. And they have done so. They've done a beautiful job of building out that partnership. And it's something that is continuing to flourish as a result of that initial investment. That was the Workforce Development Board in Kansas City leading that initiative statewide as a group sponsor to support the needs of those two cities most specifically, but really the rest of the state as well. Missouri is, it's Kansas City and St. Louis, and then I guess the rest of it is not quite as substantial in terms of population size, et cetera, as Kansas City and St. Louis are. So If you have specific questions about how this might work or what some of the hiccups might be, this is a really good model, and we can certainly get you in touch with the folks at the Full Employment Council who are facilitating that group sponsorship. And you have within your own ranks um, some some expertise that has sort of lived and breathed this throughout this process of building here. Um, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the Kentucky Governor's Office of Early Childhood was a founding partner for us with the Early Childhood Workforce Connector. And I want to bring this full circle again because this is a really good example through the Kentucky Governor's Office of the kinds of approaches that we see most beneficial. What Kentucky did was really work to not break down silos, because silos are important. We need our structured programs and infrastructure that allow us to do the work that we do in our own areas of expertise. Early childhood education has its own expertise and it needs to have its own silo. And that is also true for workforce development. That is also true for post-secondary education or adult education. The problem happens when there isn't um, conversation between those silos. And so what Kentucky did was took an intentional approach to building better structures between those silos so that the end goal, creating a stronger early childhood education workforce, could be achieved. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about today. How can you use these various systems to bring the resources that they each hold together in a partnership to create the solutions that you want to see? So it is really through those collaborative relationships. There are a variety of resources that exist in the workforce system. There are a variety of resources that exist in the economic development community as well, and among other entities and organizations. And when we bring those pieces together, we are able to begin to see the full picture of what is possible. So there is a variety of funding mechanisms that the public workforce system can bring to bear, from training dollars to on-the-job training dollars, incumbent worker training dollars, support services dollars. They can support a sector partnership that would bring a number of childcare entities together to think together and plan together to advance certain workforce strategies. There are a variety of ways to bring those resources to bear in the ECE industry, but it all starts by having a relationship with that public workforce system. And the way into that relationship is by understanding how it works. So the fundamentals of it are designed to advance the priorities of a local area, to improve the connection of employers and job seekers. And the early childhood education industry itself sits in the middle of those two key constituencies for the Workforce Board. So you are in a strong position of power and agency to make things move forward. And the best way that I can recommend to do that is through partnership. So there is an opportunity to really layer resources together through, I'm not going to try to say it because it comes out of my mouth wrong every single time, but these words here you see, I'll start with layer and then it gets easier. Layer, blending, and braiding. I usually say braiding. I don't know, I mixed the words up, but I did it right that time. So think about how the resources that early childhood education and Head Start specifically have. And again, there are some examples that ECWC has that has brought the resources of Head Start together with the resources of the public workforce system to really build out a model that can be sustainable. And that's going to look a little bit different in every community. It's important through building those relationships to understand the complexity of each one of those silos, where there are points of intersection and where there are rubs, and to be cognizant and thoughtful about how you make those connections happen in order to make sure that we optimize the resources. And resources are both monetary as well as relational and political. So we want to make sure we're taking advantage of all of the ways in which we can move a partnership forward. So that is that. I know we're going to do some Q&A here, and thankfully we have 15 minutes to do that. I did want to leave you with just how to connect with us. So we have a newsletter. We'd love for you to sign up for our newsletter. We would also love for you to follow us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@ecwconnector.org. And then my contact information is down here as well. So thank you so much for giving me the time to talk a little bit about the public workforce system, its role in registered apprenticeship, and how we can build partnerships to connect the dots between early childhood education and workforce development to build out the talent ecosystem we all strive to see.
Thank you, Tracy, for such a rich presentation. Um, we really appreciate this. I know I'm walking away with a lot today. So do we have any questions in the chat?
There's no questions in the chat yet, and if anybody has any, if they could drop them in, we could ask those specifically. And then we have some that was sort of generated before that Tracy has covered, but she could dive into sort of more specifically if people don't have another. But do people have any that they thought of as she was talking? I don't see those yet. No questions. I have a question, Tracy. You talked about the potential of employers to join their local workforce boards. Is that restricted to nonprofit or for-profits, or is any employer welcome in a workforce board?
Any employer is welcome. Again, it all goes back to relationships. So it's important to build your relationships with that local workforce board, understand who's leading it, what their priorities are, and who some of those gatekeepers might be, as well as who some of those emissaries might be. And to begin to build out those relationships. I think having the voice of early childhood education on the board can help to really begin to change strategy to drive more investments in the early childhood education space.
That seems like such a great strategy. There, I'm still watching to see if any new questions come up in the chat. And wondering, just looking at some of the questions that were generated before, can you give perhaps an example? It was great the example you gave about what is happening in Missouri. But can you talk about another place where childcare folks or early childhood folks have really been able to connect well with their workforce board?
Yes. I think, we have a lot of examples through the Early Childhood Workforce Connector. And I'll just focus on one here. So the University of Maryland is working with the board in Prince George's County, Employ Prince George, to bring resources to their apprentices And those resources are to support the training needs of those apprentices, to cover the cost of the training that is facilitated through the University of Maryland. I see some questions here in the chat, if you don't
Yes,
mind, Reva.
yes, I
Um,
see them too. If you see them, I just go ahead and address them.
okay. So certainly I think that we all have concerns about what's happening federally right now. We watching it super close, and are very cognizant of the potential risk of funds being cut. I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know how that's going to play out. I do know that there was a hearing yesterday with the House Education and Labor Committee, and that hearing had strong support for the public workforce system. And there were specific conversations about advancing the new authorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, which is the A Stronger Workforce for America Act. And there seemed to be strong bipartisan support for workforce development. And so, again, I don't know how it's going to turn out. All I know is what we currently have and the signals that we're getting from Congress and from leadership. So we're going to continue to operate from what we know as fact and advance the good quality work that we do. And I think a big part of that work is strengthened when we are in partnership together. So I encourage us to continue to build those relationships and create that united front so that those investments are able to continue.
At a local level, Tracy, how would somebody even find out who their local workforce board is, like what is happening locally in their area, so they can make that connection? If somebody's really just discovering that sector now, what would be their next step to look to meet some of these people?
So there is an online uh, American Job Center finder, and I will share that link with the team here so that they can get that out to everybody on the call. You go ahead and follow that link. It's going to take you to a page where you can put in your own community and find out who the Workforce Development Board is for your local area. And it's pretty up to date and pretty current. So you can start there.
Wow, that's really helpful. Are there other questions from the group about where to get started, or about their individual situations in relationship to these partnerships? Or does somebody have another example of a partnership that they're in, or a relationship that they've built that they would offer to the group?
Marcia, that's a good point. Yeah, so they may call it I mean, it's officially branded as an American Job Center, that location, but they might call it a career center. Sometimes those happen, those are housed or are situated at your community or technical college. Sometimes they're at like a Goodwill agency or an agency like that. There are a variety of ways in which they are situated. But that link, which I promised to get out to everybody, will help you find that. Yes, again, branded to local priority. So Career Suncoast makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Stacy.
You did mention a number of the sort of resources that might be available through a partnership. And specifically, I heard you talk about training, but can you go over again sort of what does that connection with a workforce board potentially bring into a registered apprenticeship program in early childhood,
Sure.
to help them be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the core tenets of registered apprenticeship is the related technical instruction, the classroom instruction. And so, that can be covered through an individual training account that is facilitated through the Workforce Board. A person would need to be enrolled in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act program. And that, I mentioned that we have worked with workforce boards to, bring down the some of the barriers to getting to that enrollment. But once enrolled, you're eligible for that individual training account resource, which covers those costs of the related technical instruction. There's also the on-the-job learning component of registered apprenticeship, which the employer bears. And so that can be covered through um, a financial relationship with the workforce board, where they would do an on-the-job training contract with that employer to cover the costs of the on-the-job learning. There's also incumbent worker training. So that's another resource that the Workforce Board can bring. There's support services, like I mentioned. Apprentices might need books, they might need a computer, they might need internet access, that variety of things that they might need, and those are all eligible services that the Workforce Board can help to cover when you build that partnership with them.
Well, we're almost at 12:30. Keisha, did you want to wrap up a little bit, or if there's no more questions for Tracy now?
Cheryl's going to take us home.
Oh, Cheryl, sorry.
Oh, no, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Tracy. This was a wonderful presentation. We really, really appreciate it. And I know I also learned a lot. And so excited I took lots of pictures, excited to dive deeper. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for joining. And so our next work circle, and everyone is invited to it is the first Thursday of the month. So it will be the first Thursday of April. And that will be a conversation where we can share ideas of what we learned here and take it one step further. So very excited to see everyone hopefully in April. And thank you again for joining, and thank you, Tracy, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Tracy. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm.